Welcome, everyone, to today's Explainer. We are stepping straight into a high-stakes digital crime scene today. We're diving deep into the world of U.S. trucking tax compliance, specifically the International Fuel Tax Agreement, or IFTA. Now, if you're in the logistics business, you already know that DOT auditors absolutely do not mess around. So today, we are investigating the massive financial vulnerabilities just hiding in plain sight within fleet data. And we're going to look at how an automated forensic system, known as the VMaster 2.0 engine, operates like a relentless digital detective to keep fleets alive. Okay, let's jump right in because we need to talk about a number that is absolutely terrifying if you own a trucking fleet. 4.0. That's 4.0 miles per gallon. This is the punitive, literal death penalty tax rate that Department of Transportation auditors will just slap you with the second they find unverifiable data in your logs. They don't just, politely ask you for a correction. No way. They automatically drop your fleet's miles per gallon rating down to this incredibly abysmal baseline. By enforcing this hyper-inefficient 4.0 MPG standard, the system that calculates your fuel taxes is suddenly going to demand astronomical payments. You're effectively being punished financially for every single mile that you couldn't scientifically prove. And look, the stakes here, they couldn't be more catastrophic. When an auditor flags your data as corrupt or fraudulent, they aren't just looking at the last few months. They can and will trigger a retroactive audit stretching up to 4 entire years into the past. Just imagine the compounding interest on that 4.0 MPG death penalty over 4 years. We are talking about fines that easily range from $10,000 to $30,000, retroactively applied, compounding fast. For a massive corporate fleet, sure, maybe that's a rounding error. But if you're running a small or mid-sized fleet of under 90 trucks, that is a fatal blow. A single failed audit can literally mean instant bankruptcy.
So what actually triggers these massive audits? Let's put on our forensic detective hats for a second. Traditional accountants usually just look at your fuel receipts and total miles, right? But they completely miss the underlying data rot. There are 3 fatal data demons that DOT auditors ruthlessly hunt for hiding inside your raw electronic logging device, or ELD, data. Those are federal time zones, gap miles, and manual typos. Let's break these down one by one so we can see exactly how they destroy a fleet's legal standing. Okay, demon number 1 is the federal time zones trap. And wow, does this create absolute chaos. Imagine a truck driving from Central Time over to Mountain Time, right at the exact moment daylight saving time hits. If your software isn't forensically normalizing all those timestamps to a universal standard like UTC, your data scrambles entirely. Suddenly, your system is telling you the truck was in Texas, but the fuel card receipt shows a purchase over in New Mexico at the exact same time. To a DOT auditor, this doesn't look like a simple computer glitch. It looks exactly like deliberate fuel tax fraud. Moving on to the second demon, gap miles greater than 50 miles. This is basically unverifiable physical distance. It gets created when a GPS signal drops out, maybe in a tunnel, a dead zone, or, honestly, worst of all, when a driver intentionally unplugs their ELD to hide their hours of service. DOT auditors treat these massive, unexplained missing miles as straight-up, deliberate tax evasion. It is absolutely the most critical error a fleet can make, and let me tell you, it's the absolute fastest way to get that 4.0 MPG death penalty slammed onto your business.
And then we have the final demon. Honestly, this one's just human nature. Manual typos. Picture this. A fleet manager gets a raw CSV file from their ELD, opens it up in Excel just to take a quick peek, and hits save. Instantly, Excel tries to be helpful and auto-formats the data. It strips the leading zeros right off your truck ID numbers, corrupts the date formats, and completely shatters the structural integrity of the file. By the time that file reaches an automated auditing system, the data is completely useless. Human touch in the world of IFTA data forensics is literally lethal. So how do you actually fight these demons? Well, the VMaster 2.0 engine wasn't built like your standard run-of-the-mill accounting software. It was built on what our sources describe as a legalist philosophy. This is actually compared to the ancient unforgiving legalism from the Warring States period. What this means in practice is that it operates on an architecture of absolute law and zero exceptions. It ruthlessly executes its systemic logic and coldly, just completely coldly, rejects any human error, manual manipulation, or corrupted data. It doesn't guess. It doesn't try to make things work. If the data is tainted, the engine rejects it immediately to protect the overall integrity of the audit. Now, there is a massive, stark contrast between the traditional way of doing things and this legalist approach. Traditional CPA accountants are largely relying on manual data entry. They take whatever flawed summary the ELD spits out, type it into a tax form, and then just kind of hope and pray the DOT won't notice the massive gap miles or the time zone errors. It's a wildly fragile game of roulette. But the heavily armored VMaster 2.0 engine, it uses automated temporal spatial mapping to cross-reference every single GPS ping with every single fuel receipt. Operating with an emotionless 0.01% anomaly tolerance, it catches every error way before the government ever does. Let's actually walk through exactly how this ruthless VMaster pipeline works in practice. Step 1, it auto-ingests the raw ELD logs and fuel data directly. No human hands are allowed to touch, open, or edit these files, period. Step 2, it applies those rigid legalist rules. If it detects even a hint of manual typos or corrupted formatting, it outright refuses to process the file and sends it right back to the source. But if it finds small, natural GPS gaps near borders, it mathematically prorates them. And finally, step 3, it outputs the ultimate audit trail. You get a perfectly clean, legally defensible set of files that are 100% ready for the DOT. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly does the engine handle those small, totally natural GPS dropouts that happen at state borders? It uses something called the pro rata 50-50 shield. Say a truck loses its signal right as it crosses from California into Arizona. The engine doesn't try to guess the exact physical feet driven in each state. Instead, it deliberately sacrifices the idea of perfect physical mileage and just splits the gap exactly in half. 50% to one state, 50% to the other. Why do this? Because it creates an impenetrable legal shield. It proves definitively to the DOT that you aren't trying to hide miles in a cheaper tax jurisdiction, which completely neutralizes the penalty for what's known as blind jurisdiction. But wait, what happens when the gap isn't just a tiny little border blip, but a massive 100-mile blackout because the driver actually unplugged the ELD? Well, the VMaster engine stops. Its legalist programming flat-out refuses to automatically prorate a gap that large because the DOT would instantly flag that as fraud. Instead, it forces a deliberate manual override using a highly specialized tool called Truck Router. An expert has to go in and scientifically reconstruct the exact legally permissible commercial route that the truck had to take to get from point A to point B. You have to prove every single missing mile. So when that inevitable audit finally happens, this is exactly how you win. You present the auditor with an invincible forensic shield made up of 3 core elements. First, you hand over the raw ELD logs. This shows exactly where the system failed. It's your initial crime scene. Second, you provide the truck router route sheets. This gives the DOT a scientific reconstruction of the only legal path taken during that blackout. And third, you present the cross-referenced fuel receipts, perfectly matched up to the exact UTC timestamps of that route. This is your undeniable alibi. When you present this trifecta, DOT inspectors are mathematically and legally forced to close the audit immediately. We've seen today that surviving in the logistics industry isn't just about moving freight anymore. It's heavily about defending your data. The DOT is out there, actively hunting for those time zone mismatches, those gap miles, and those lethal manual typos. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Knowing what you know now about that terrifying 4.0 MPG death penalty, will your fleet's data survive the next ruthless sweep by DOT auditors? Or is it time you upgraded your defenses to a legalist-level forensic shield? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly, highly recommend you start investigating your own data today.